Entire civilizations vanished almost overnight, leaving behind ghost cities and whispers of terror. Mysterious sea peoples armed with strange weapons appeared out of nowhere, smashing everything in their path. And if you dig into the oldest stories, you'll find chilling accounts of fiery chariots in the sky and cosmic battles, right around the time the world fell apart. Number 7. The day the lights went out on civilization. Imagine a world buzzing with life, a network of powerful kingdoms and empires stretching across the Mediterranean and the Near East. This was the Late Bronze Age, a time of incredible achievements, mighty rulers, and cities that were centers of art, learning, and trade. We're talking about giants like the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, a superpower that rivaled even Egypt. Think of their great capital, Hattusa, with its massive stone walls, temples, and royal archives filled with clay tablets. They were masters of diplomacy and war, their chariots feared on the battlefield. Then there were the Mycenaeans in Greece, the legendary heroes of Homer's tales. They built fortress palaces like Mycenae, with its famous Lion Gate, and Tiryns, with its colossal Cyclopean walls. Their warriors, clad in boar-tusk helmets and bronze armor, sailed the Aegean, trading and sometimes raiding. Their civilization was sophisticated with its own script, Linear B, and a rich artistic tradition. Their influence spread far and wide. Further south, on the island of Crete, lay the remnants of the once glorious Minoan civilization, which had been absorbed by the Mycenaeans, but still contributed to the rich tapestry of the Aegean world. And across the sea, Cyprus was a copper-rich island, a vital hub in the international trade network, its cities wealthy from the metal that gave the age its name. In Mesopotamia, the Kassites ruled Babylonia, maintaining ancient traditions, while Elam, in what is now southwestern Iran, was another significant power. Even Egypt, the eternal kingdom of the Nile, was deeply enmeshed in this interconnected world, trading, making treaties, and occasionally going to war with its neighbors. For centuries, these cultures had grown, clashed, and coexisted. They exchanged letters written on clay tablets, traded precious goods like gold, tin, copper, ivory, and wine. Royal families intermarried. It was, in many ways, a first go at a globalized world, a complex system of interdependent states. And then, around the year 1200 BCE, something went terribly, catastrophically wrong. It wasn't a slow decline for many of these places. It was like a switch was flipped. Within a few decades, sometimes even a few years, many of these magnificent civilizations simply collapsed. Hattusa, the proud Hittite capital, was violently destroyed and abandoned, never to be reoccupied in its former glory. The entire Hittite Empire vanished from history, its language and people largely forgotten until archaeologists rediscovered them thousands of years later. In Greece, the great Mycenaean palaces like Mycenae, Pylos, and Thebes were razed to the ground. Their sophisticated writing system, Linear B, disappeared. Greece plunged into what historians call a dark age that lasted for centuries. Cyprus saw many of its coastal cities devastated. Ugarit, a vital port city in Syria, famous for its library of cuneiform tablets, was utterly annihilated, with poignant evidence of its sudden destruction, like a kiln full of pottery never fired and tablets baking in the inferno that consumed the city. Even mighty Egypt, while it didn't collapse entirely, was severely weakened, losing its empire in Canaan and Libya and facing repeated invasions. The intricate web of trade that had defined the Bronze Age shattered. Populations plummeted. Literacy declined or vanished in many regions. Archaeologists digging through the ruins of these once proud cities often find a thick layer of ash and destruction. At Pylos, in Greece, tablets were found baked hard by the fire that destroyed the palace, their contents speaking of virgin preparations, watchers guarding the coasts, and calls for bronze to make weapons. It's a snapshot of a society on the brink, facing an overwhelming threat. The question that has baffled historians for generations is, what could cause such widespread, rapid, and simultaneous devastation across so many powerful and seemingly stable civilizations? Was it just one thing, or a perfect storm of disasters? And if it was a storm, what was the lightning that ignited it all? Could any purely human conflict, or even a series of natural disasters as understood at the time, account for the sheer scale and finality of this event? An event that effectively reset civilization in large parts of the known world. Number 6. Invaders from where? Exactly. The Sea People's riddle. As if the sudden crumbling of empires wasn't mysterious enough, ancient records, particularly from Egypt, speak of a new and terrifying enemy that appeared during this chaotic period. The peoples of the sea, or sea peoples as they are commonly known. These groups are described as pouring in from the north, by land and by sea, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III, on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, left dramatic inscriptions and reliefs detailing his battles against these invaders. He claims they had made a conspiracy in their islands, and that no land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia, on being cut off at one time. These are all major Bronze Age states and regions, including the Hittite homeland, Hatti, and Cyprus, Alashia. The reliefs at Medinet Habu show these sea peoples in desperate battles with Egyptian forces. They are depicted as a coalition of different groups, each with distinct attire and weaponry. Some, like the Peliset, often identified with the Philistines of the Bible, wear distinctive feathered headdresses. Others, like the Shurdin, are shown with horned helmets and round shields, wielding long swords. The Luka, Teker, Denyen, Weshesh, and Shekelels are other names that appear in the inscriptions. Their warriors are shown fighting fiercely, sometimes with their families in tow in ox carts, suggesting they weren't just raiders, but were perhaps seeking new lands to settle. But here's the truly puzzling part. Who were they? Where did they come from with such sudden, overwhelming force? The Egyptian texts are frustratingly vague, calling them of the sea, or from their islands in the midst of the sea. This has led to endless speculation. Were they displaced populations from the collapsing Mycenaean world? Anatolians, fleeing the Hittite collapse, Sardinians, Sicilians, Etruscans. Scholars have proposed dozens of theories trying to match the names and depictions with known peoples, but no single explanation has been universally accepted. It's like they materialized out of the fog of war, wreaked havoc, and then some of them vanished or assimilated, leaving only their fearsome reputation behind. The weapons and ships of the sea peoples also raise questions. Some of the swords depicted, like the Naue, the second type, were relatively new and effective. Their ships, as shown in the Medinet Habu naval battle scene, seem to be different from the Egyptian vessels, though the depictions are stylized. Could their military technology or tactics have been so superior as to overwhelm the established armies of the Near East? The Egyptians, under Ramesses III, claimed to have eventually defeated them in a great land and sea battle around 1175 BCE. But it was a hard-fought victory, and Egypt itself was significantly weakened by the effort. Some researchers have pointed to the unusual nature of this confederation, a large, diverse group of people apparently coordinating their attacks across vast distances by land and sea. How was such a coalition formed and maintained? What was their ultimate goal? Was it simple plunder, or were they driven by something more? Texts say they laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. Our plans will succeed. This sounds like a group with a grand, almost apocalyptic ambition. Could the term islands in the midst of the sea have a meaning that we're missing? In a world where the sky was often seen as a celestial ocean, could islands refer to something not of this world, or perhaps bases of operation that were not easily identifiable continental landmasses? The suddenness of their appearance, their diverse yet coordinated nature, and the sheer terror they inspired has led some to wonder if they were not just another group of migrating humans, but something other. Or at the very least, were they perhaps fleeing something even more terrifying than themselves, forced into a desperate wave of conquest? The Sea Peoples remain one of the most enigmatic and pivotal actors in the Bronze Age collapse, a shadowy force that seemed to strike from nowhere and everywhere at once. Number 5. Sky gods and burning chariots in ancient records. When a society is under immense stress, when the world as they know it is falling apart, people often turn to their gods or look for signs in the heavens. But what if some of the ancient stories that talk about gods, sky battles, and fiery chariots aren't just myths, but distorted memories of real, inexplicable events witnessed by people struggling to describe things beyond their comprehension? Around the time of the Bronze Age collapse, and in the centuries that followed, many cultures told stories that, when looked at with a modern eye, can seem strangely suggestive. Consider the ancient Indian texts, the Vedas and the Puranas. While their dating is complex and debated, some layers of these texts are very ancient. They speak of Vimanas, which are described as flying palaces or chariots. Some texts, like the Mahabharata, describe incredible battles involving these Vimanas, deploying weapons that sound uncannily like modern superweapons, weapons that could destroy entire armies, cause the environment to boil, or make hair and nails fall out. Of course, these are epic poems, filled with allegory and symbolism. Persistence and detail of these descriptions of aerial vehicles and powerful destructive celestial weapons have led some to ask if they could be echoes of something more tangible. In the Mediterranean world, Greek mythology is full of tales of gods interacting with mortals, often descending from Mount Olympus or the heavens. Zeus wielded thunderbolts. Poseidon could cause earthquakes. The story of Phaethon, son of the sun god Helios, who tried to drive his father's sun chariot, lost control and scorched the earth before being struck down by Zeus, is a tale of celestial fire causing terrestrial devastation. Could such myths be imaginative ways of explaining comets, meteorites, or other natural phenomena? Or could they, in some instances, be attempts to rationalize encounters with something far stranger? Many Near Eastern mythologies also feature sky gods, storm gods, and battles in the heavens. The Hittites, for example, had a powerful storm god, Tarhunt, who rode a chariot pulled by bulls and wielded a mace or lightning. The Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, describes a cataclysmic battle between the god Marduk and the primordial goddess Tiamat, a conflict that shapes the cosmos. While these are clearly mythological frameworks, the prevalence of powerful, often destructive sky beings in the belief systems of the Bronze Age peoples is noteworthy. When cities were burning and civilizations were collapsing, did people look to the skies and see their angry gods? What if some of these gods were not supernatural beings but visitors from elsewhere, possessing technology that would seem god-like to Bronze Age people? If such visitors were involved in conflict, either amongst themselves or with terrestrial populations, their battles, their vehicles, and their weapons would undoubtedly be described in terms of the familiar chariots, fire, thunder, and powerful capricious deities. The sudden appearance of fiery chariots or celestial boats in the sky perhaps engaging in what looked like battles, would surely be interpreted through a religious or mythological lens. There's also the question of knowledge. Some ancient myths speak of gods bestowing knowledge upon humanity, of agriculture, writing, metalworking. If advanced beings were present, even briefly, could some of their knowledge or depictions of their technology have trickled down and been incorporated into art and legend, perhaps misunderstood or transformed over time. The idea isn't that every myth is a literal account of alien visitation, but during a period of such profound and widespread crisis as the Bronze Age collapse, when the old certainties were shattered and people were witnessing events that defied easy explanation, it is conceivable that some of these events were so extraordinary that they could only be recorded in the language of gods and monsters, of cosmic battles and heavenly fire. It makes you wonder what terrifying sights might have inspired such enduring legends. Number 4. Earth's fury unleashed or pushed. Period around 1200 BC wasn't just marked by invasions and collapsing empires. There's strong scientific evidence that the climate took a dramatic turn for the worse. Paleoclimatologists, studying things like tree rings, ice cores, and lake sediments, have pieced together a picture of a prolonged and severe drought that struck many parts of the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. Precisely during the time of the Bronze Age collapse, this wasn't just a dry spell. It was a mega-drought, lasting for decades, perhaps even centuries in some areas. Such a drought would have had devastating consequences. Crop failures, famine, dried-up rivers, and mass migrations of people desperate for food and water. Imagine the great agricultural heartlands of the Bronze Age world, the fertile plains of Greece, Anatolia, and Syria, turning to dust. This alone could certainly destabilize kingdoms, force populations to move, and lead to conflict over scarce resources. Many scholars believe this climate change was a primary driver of the collapse, creating the conditions for the social unrest, migrations, and warfare that followed. Climate chaos wasn't limited to drought. There's also evidence for increased seismic activity around this time. Earthquakes are common in regions like Greece, Crete, and Anatolia, which lie on active fault lines. Archaeological digs have revealed city walls tumbled, buildings collapsed, and human remains crushed under fallen masonry, all pointing to powerful earthquakes. Some theories suggest a storm of earthquakes might have rocked the region, contributing to the destruction of major urban centers. The eruption of the Hekla, III volcano in Iceland, dated to around this period, though far away, could have also spewed ash into the atmosphere, potentially affecting global temperatures and weather patterns for a short time. There's also evidence for tsunamis in certain coastal areas, so a picture emerges of a world under siege from Mother Nature herself. Droughts, famines, earthquakes, and possibly volcanic disruptions. This perfect storm of natural disasters is a compelling explanation for why so many civilizations buckled simultaneously. But here's a question that some have quietly pondered. Could these natural disasters have been too perfectly timed, too widespread, or even too intense to be entirely natural in their origin or their devastating impact? Throughout history, storm gods have been prominent deities in many cultures that experienced the Bronze Age collapse. These gods were often depicted as immensely powerful, capable of wielding lightning, wind, and rain, and bringing about both creation and destruction. While this is a natural way to personify the awesome forces of nature, what if during this specific period, the storms were not just meteorological or geological in the usual sense? If one were to entertain the idea of a highly advanced external agency operating on Earth, could such an agency possess the means to influence or trigger environmental catastrophes? We are even today only beginning to understand the complex systems that govern our planet's climate and geology. Could weather modification on a massive scale, or even the deliberate triggering of seismic events through unknown technological means, have been possible for such an entity? perhaps as a way to clear out existing populations, or as a side effect of other activities like resource extraction or terraforming attempts that went badly wrong. This is, of course, deep into speculative territory. The scientific consensus is that the climate change and geological events of the Late Bronze Age were natural occurrences. However, the sheer convergence of so many different types of environmental calamities, all happening around the same time and contributing to a civilizational reset, is striking. Was it simply a tragic coincidence, a case of incredibly bad luck for the Bronze Age world? Or could the Earth's fury have been in some way nudged, amplified, or even directed by an unseen hand, turning a period of difficulty into an outright apocalypse? The scale of the environmental downturn was so profound that it makes one pause and consider all possibilities, however unsettling. Number 3. The Great Disconnect, when the world broke apart. One of the most remarkable things about the Late Bronze Age, before it all came crashing down, was how connected it was. Imagine a bustling highway system, but instead of trucks, you have ships crisscrossing the Mediterranean and caravans trekking across vast land routes. These weren't just casual trips. They were part of a highly organized, sophisticated international trade network that linked civilizations from Greece and Egypt to Mesopotamia and beyond. This network was the lifeblood of the Bronze Age. Think about bronze itself, the metal that defined the era. Bronze is an alloy made from copper and, crucially, tin. Copper was available in several places, like Cyprus, but tin was much rarer. Major sources of tin were located far away, possibly in places like Afghanistan, or even as far as Cornwall in Britain. To make bronze, these two metals had to be mined, smelted, and then transported, sometimes over thousands of miles, to where they were needed. This required complex logistical chains, diplomatic agreements between kingdoms, and merchants willing to undertake long and sometimes perilous journeys. But it wasn't just about metals. Luxury goods flowed freely between the royal courts and urban centers. Beautifully crafted Mycenaean pottery has been found all over the eastern Mediterranean, from Egypt to Syria. Egyptian scarabs and faience beads turn up in Aegean tombs. Cypriot pottery was exported widely. Raw materials like ivory from Africa via Egypt, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Nubia, and amber from the Baltic region all found their way into the palaces and workshops of the Bronze Age elite. Even ideas and technologies traveled along these routes. Scribes and artisans moved between courts, sharing knowledge of writing, art styles, and administrative techniques. Kings exchanged elaborate diplomatic letters, calling each other brother, forming alliances and negotiating treaties. It was a truly cosmopolitan era. Then around 1200 BC, this vibrant system of exchange and interaction collapsed with shocking speed and thoroughness. The well-worn trade routes fell silent. The flow of goods dried up. International diplomacy ceased. It was as if someone had cut all the wires in a complex circuit board. The evidence for this is stark. Shipwrecks from before the collapse, like the one at Uluburun off the coast of Turkey, dated to the late 14th century BCE, show an astonishing variety of goods from at least 7 different cultures on a single vessel. After the collapse, such rich cargoes disappear from the archaeological record for a long time. Tin in particular became incredibly scarce, leading to a decline in bronze production in many areas. Some regions even seem to have reverted to using more primitive tools for a while. Question is, why would these interconnected societies, which depended so heavily on this trade for their prosperity and even their core technologies, allow this system to break down so completely? Internal strife, famine, and local conflicts could certainly disrupt trade routes temporarily or in specific regions. The Great Disconnect of the Late Bronze Age was a systemic failure. It wasn't just one route that closed. It was the entire network. What force could be powerful enough to shatter these long-established links across such a vast area? If cities were being destroyed, palaces looted, and populations scattered, then yes, trade would naturally suffer. Collapse of the trade network also seems to have been a cause, as much as a consequence of the broader societal breakdown. Without access to essential raw materials and markets, local economies would have faltered, leading to more instability. Could an external entity, perhaps the same one responsible for other aspects of the collapse, have deliberately targeted these trade routes? If an invader wanted to cripple the Bronze Age world, disrupting its economic lifelines would be a highly effective strategy. Controlling the seas, blockading ports, or destroying key production centers like mines and agricultural regions would bring the entire system to its knees. Or perhaps the invaders themselves were the new masters of the trade routes, redirecting resources for their own purposes and cutting off those who resisted. The ensuing isolation had profound effects. Regions that had once been part of a wider world became insular. Literacy, which had been essential for international correspondence and record-keeping, declined or vanished in many places. The world became smaller, more fragmented, and for many, much poorer and more dangerous. The great interconnected highway of the Bronze Age had become a series of dead ends. What could have erected such insurmountable roadblocks on a global scale, plunging vibrant civilizations into darkness and isolation for centuries? Number 2. Egypt's last stand. A deal with the devil, or a glimpse of the enemy. Amidst the widespread chaos and destruction that characterized the end of the Bronze Age, one great power, though severely battered, managed to survive: Egypt. While the Hittite Empire vanished, the Mycenaean palaces burned, and trade routes disintegrated, the land of the pharaohs held on, albeit precariously. This resilience is remarkable and begs the question, why Egypt? What did they do differently, or what advantages did they possess that allowed them to weather a storm that utterly consumed so many of their contemporaries? Pharaohs Merneptah, around 1213 to 1203 BC, and more famously, Ramesses III, around 1186 to 1155 BCE, both recorded significant battles against coalitions of invaders, including the aforementioned Sea Peoples and Libyan tribes. The inscriptions and reliefs at Karnak and Medinet Habu paint vivid pictures of these desperate struggles. Ramesses III in particular portrays himself as the savior of Egypt, repelling a massive onslaught by land and sea. His accounts describe how the Sea Peoples had already devastated vast swaths of the eastern Mediterranean before reaching the borders of Egypt. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, his inscriptions proclaim, emphasizing the existential threat. Egypt did have certain inherent advantages. Its geography, with vast deserts protecting its eastern and western flanks, and the Nile providing a relatively stable agricultural base, offered a degree of insulation. Its long tradition of centralized rule, a powerful priesthood, and a well-organized military bureaucracy also contributed to its stability. But other great powers had their own strengths, and they still fell. So, what else could have been at play? Did Egypt somehow possess superior military technology or tactics? The Medinet Habu reliefs show Egyptian archers and chariots in action against the Sea Peoples. While the Egyptians claimed victory, the battles were clearly hard-fought. Could Egypt have had a more advanced understanding of intelligence gathering or defensive strategies that allowed them to anticipate and counter the invaders' moves more effectively than others? Or is it possible that Egypt's survival was due to something more than just its own strength and ingenuity? In a world facing an overwhelming, perhaps even otherworldly threat, could Egypt have made some sort of accommodation or struck a deal that other nations couldn't or wouldn't. This is purely speculative, of course. But when one power endures while all its neighbors collapse under mysterious circumstances, such questions inevitably arise. Were there negotiations, tributes paid, or perhaps even a reluctant alliance formed with a faction of the invaders, or with the force behind the invaders? Alternatively, did Egypt's prolonged engagement with these mysterious enemies give them unique insights? The Shurden, one of the sea peoples, are interesting because some of them appear as mercenaries in the Egyptian army, even before the major invasions of Ramesses III's reign, serving as bodyguards for Ramesses II. Did the Egyptians learn something crucial about the nature, capabilities, or origins of these groups through such interactions? Did they, perhaps, manage to capture and study some of the invaders' unfamiliar weaponry, or even their vessels? The Medinet Habu inscriptions themselves, while propagandistic, offer tantalizing clues. They list the names of the various groups forming the Sea People's Confederation: Peliset, Jeker, Shikalej, Danyen, Weshesh, names that have echoed down through history, their precise origins still debated. By fighting, and according to their own accounts, defeating such a diverse and seemingly unstoppable force, did Egypt gain a temporary reprieve, a breathing space while the rest of the world burned? Even if Egypt's survival was solely down to its own prowess and a bit of luck, its struggle provides one of our clearest, albeit filtered, eyewitness accounts of the forces at play during the Bronze Age collapse. The descriptions of an enemy that came from the islands and overwhelmed established kingdoms paint a picture of a crisis unlike any seen before. Egypt stood as a battered lighthouse in a sea of darkness, its survival a testament to its resilience, but also a focal point for questions about the true nature of the cataclysm that swept away an entire age. What secrets did the Egyptians learn in their desperate fight for survival? Secrets that may have died with them or lie hidden in untranslated texts or unexplored ruins. Number 1. Scars on the earth and whispers in the dust. When we look back at the smoldering ruins of the Bronze Age, beyond the grand narratives of collapsing empires and mysterious invaders, there are peculiar physical traces and lingering enigmas in the archaeological record that make you scratch your head. These are the subtle, unsettling clues found in the very stones and soil, hints that the destruction wasn't always straightforward, not always attributable to the known methods of warfare or natural disaster of that time. One such curious phenomenon is vitrification. This is where stone, rock, or even mud brick melts and fuses into a glass-like substance. It requires incredibly intense heat, far greater than what's typically produced by an ordinary house fire or even the burning of a besieged city. Yet, vitrified remains have been reported at some ancient sites, including some hill forts in Europe that date to periods around or after the Bronze Age. While conventional explanations often involve prolonged timber-laced fires built against stone walls, or even lightning strikes, in rare cases, the extent and intensity of vitrification at certain locations have led some to wonder if unconventional heat sources might have been involved. Could weapons generating extreme temperatures far beyond simple fire have been deployed, leaving these strange glassy scars on the landscape? Then there's the sheer totality of destruction at many sites. Bronze Age warfare, while brutal, often involved conquering a city to control its resources and population or to exact tribute. Razing a city to the ground and rendering it uninhabitable for centuries was less common, especially for major centers. Yet, places like Hattusa, Mycenae, and Ugarit weren't just defeated, they were obliterated. At Ugarit, archaeologists found cuneiform tablets baked in the final conflagration, some of them urgent messages speaking of enemy ships and imminent attack. The destruction was so sudden and complete that it suggests an overwhelming force with a capacity for annihilation that went beyond typical inter-kingdom rivalry. Was the goal simply to conquer, or was it to erase, to ensure these centers of power could never rise again? What about out-of-place artifacts, or UPARTs, as they are sometimes called? While many suppose UPARTs have been debunked or reinterpreted, the idea persists that some objects have been found that seem technologically anachronistic for their time. For this specific period, concrete, undisputed examples of truly advanced, alien-like technology are, of course, not part of mainstream archaeology. However, the very concept of encountering something utterly foreign and technologically superior is what fuels this line of questioning. If such an encounter occurred, how would fragile advanced artifacts survive thousands of years, and how would they be interpreted even if found? Perhaps the artifacts left behind were not physical objects, but rather the perplexing patterns of destruction themselves, or the sudden disappearance of entire peoples and their knowledge. Consider the Dark Age that followed the Bronze Age collapse in many regions, particularly Greece. It wasn't just a period of poverty and reduced population. It was a period of lost knowledge. The sophisticated Linear B script used by the Mycenaeans vanished entirely. Complex architectural techniques were forgotten. Artistic styles became simpler. It took centuries for civilization in these areas to regain the levels of complexity seen in the Bronze Age. Why such a profound and lengthy regression? Was it simply that the systems supporting specialized knowledge had collapsed? Or was there deeper trauma? A fear of rebuilding what had attracted such devastation in the first place? If the cause of the collapse was something truly terrifying and incomprehensible, perhaps survivors chose, consciously or unconsciously, to abandon the paths that led to such a catastrophe, leading to a forgetting of certain technologies or societal structures. These faint whispers in the dust, these unusual scars on the earth, the vitrified stones, the utter desolation of once mighty cities, the profound loss of knowledge, they add another layer of mystery to the Bronze Age collapse. They hint at events and forces that may not fit neatly into our conventional historical models. They open the door, just a crack, to the possibility that the agents of destruction were not only human, and that the weapons used were not all forged in earthly fires. What truly happened in those final chaotic years that left such deep and puzzling marks on the ancient world, marks that still provoke questions and wonder today?